Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Jim, hello, Jim.
John, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. What is that? What is the cap you're wearing? What does it say on that?
That's one of the ones I talk about. This is this is the black clover.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I buy their hats all the time. I wear baseball hats because I'm outside a lot, and they're the hat of choice. I used to wear exclusively team-related apparel, but now that I have retired from sports altogether, I have gone in a different direction, and I love the Black Clover brand. Their emails to me are always clever and funny, and gosh dang it, I end up buying a baseball hat from them.
Well, I gotcha. Okay, fantastic.
More than you wanted to know, apparently.
No, I knew there was a story. There's always a story. We're still in season 5, almost halfway through. We're at episode 513, that's past. I think we're past halfway. Yeah, we're just past halfway. And before we dive in, I do want to mention, I don't think I mentioned last time, we've been talking about going to the Behind the Page Eli Marks podcast YouTube page and subscribing if you can to help us get those numbers up that you can listen to. I believe every recorded Eli Marks book is up there, plus all of the old podcasts. And now there's a new thing. I put together an 8-part series.
Yeah.
They're kind of like audio books. I've taken from the last 5 years of interviews with these amazing magicians, and I put them together by topic. So we have one whole essentially an audiobook, I guess, but it's on YouTube. Magicians who grew up in magic, and then there's the nuts and bolts of magic, and there's magic venues, and there's the legends of magic. Anyway, there's 8 of them. I think by the time this comes out, almost, I think 6 or 7 of them will be up, but certainly by the end of summer, they'll all be up there. Totally
That's
free.
fabulous.
It's a great way just to listen to the meat and get rid of the goofiness of us chatting in between the meat. So yeah, it's really fun.
It's about time, I feel.
Yeah, it was fun to go back and just gather those things together. We've got hours and hours and hours of great interviews, and they are out there for anybody. Just look at the link for Behind the Page, that particular interview series called Conversations from the Eli Marks podcast. You can find that link in the show notes, or just go to YouTube and type in Conversations from the Eli Marks podcast. You'll find ultimately all 8 of those videos. Each one runs, I think, anywhere between 3 and 7 hours. So, it's good listening. If you're going in for a long drive, you can certainly do that. But today we are going to, I'm really excited about today, because today, we love talking to those magicians who we put together that whole series of that I just talked about. But we also love talking to people who have had interesting lives where magic was just a part of it. I mentioned, I think last time, that we're looking to do more of this next year. We had some great suggestions sent in. If you have any other ideas, please send them in, of people we should talk to. People like today's guest, George Reis. George reached out to me because he enjoyed the books and wanted to let me know that he started magic at the age of 60 when his wife took him to the Magic Castle for his birthday, and he wandered into the gift shop, and he's since then taken lessons, and this is now, although he is still working, he is also working at being a magician, and he has a fascinating job. He primarily works as a forensic image and video analyst. And my first question was really simple, because I wasn't entirely certain I understood what it was he did. It must be a question that he gets a lot, because he had an immediate answer.
So I get hired by government agencies, insurance companies, but primarily private attorneys who are working on either civil cases or criminal cases. So someone's suing somebody, somebody's defending somebody is arrested for a crime. And there's going to be either photographic or video evidence involved. So there might be video that shows somebody committing a crime, or there might be a photograph that somebody has falsified. And this is going to go to court, or potentially go to court. So they need somebody to analyze the video and or photographic evidence in order to determine what it really says, if it's really a true representation of what it purports to be, if enhancing that image will pull up some information that can't be seen without that enhancement or clarification, or determining the timing of things that occurred within it, determining whether or not the view is giving a realistic view of what happened. So a lot of different things that are related to photographs and video.
Wow. Okay, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. So my first question has got to be, what is it that people like me or TV producers or writers or movie makers, what are we getting wrong about what it is you're able to do?
Well, of course, the favorite thing is, having an easy button that you could press so we can just all of a sudden clarify the video or do these instantaneous fingerprint searches off of some small little smudge. So there's a lot of technology that's presented that's way beyond what is actually possible. Another thing is in television, well, I think in books as well, we have one character who tends to do the job of multiple different individuals. So the crime scene investigator, the fingerprint analyst, the detective, and the person who makes the arrest and goes in first in front of all the SWAT team is all the same person, which of course doesn't happen. So those tend to be wrong, and they give the public an idea that we can do more. And when evidence doesn't reach that level, I think that jurors sometimes think, I wonder what they missed. And maybe there was nothing to miss.
I'm immediately thinking of some of my favorite British police procedurals because they are so heavily covered with CCTV over there, where they'll say, "Oh, we have video footage of the car parked over there in a shadowy area. Go in and blow up what the license plate number is." And I just look at the image and go, "I don't think you're going to be able to see that." Can you sometimes see that?
It's interesting. There's limitations, and you can't go beyond what the limitations are. So if there's 3 pixels or 5 pixels to describe the width of a license plate, you're not going to get 7 characters out of those 3 or 5 pixels. It just can be impossible. On the other hand, there are instances where something looks impossible, and there might be an easy process to actually get something you would not think you could get. So I've had several cases where that's happened, and it's like magic actually, because you have this video that you can see nothing in, and 5 minutes later, you have that clear license plate or that fairly clear face, or you determine the height of something that you didn't think could have been done, and it truly is kind of miraculous.
Hmm. I'm fascinated by this whole thing. Can I sidebar for a second, John Gaspard?
Sure, go right ahead.
So, one of my fascinations in life is the Old West, the Wild West, and there are some pictures of Billy the Kid that are people that I think are kind of in your field, trying to figure out, is this really a picture of Billy the Kid that's now worth $1 million, or is this Billy Cunningham, who is not Billy the Kid, and it is not worth $1 million? Is that does that fall within your purview or no?
I choose not to work on historical cases primarily because there are other aspects to the analysis of those files that are way outside of my wheelhouse. For instance, does the clothing match the type of clothing that would have been present at that particular time period? I don't know anything about clothing, as you can see by the way I'm dressed.
Or me?
Join the club, George.
Exactly. I mean,
And then we might analyze what type of process was used to create that photograph. Is it a tintype? Is it a daguerreotype? Is it a cyanotype? And then was the paper that was used to print that on something that's consistent with that time period? So there's a lot of analysis in the historical photographs and documents that are so far outside my area that I just don't work on those types of cases.
Got it. Okay. Well, that
Fascinating.
clarifies that, but fascinating nonetheless. And now, if I'm reading these notes correctly by Mr. Gaspard, you got into magic after your wife gave you lessons for your 60th birthday. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
What in what way did your wife think, "Oh, here's a good birthday present for my 60-year-old husband"? Had you previously expressed interest?
Well, we have always enjoyed magic, but really on rare occasions, and we would go to the Magic Castle every few years and enjoyed tremendously the entertainment there. And one year we were there for her birthday, and she went to her favorite part of any location we ever go to, which is the gift shop. And while she's in the gift shop, there's a sign that says, "Learn magic, take lessons here." And so she called me in and she said, "George, I think you would like this." And I said, "Yeah, it might be fun." And then so on my first day, my first lesson, I go into the classroom. Rich Cowley is the instructor, an excellent magician. And he shows us a trick, a very simple trick. It's a self-working trick. It involves a move called the cross-cut force.
Hmm.
And
Sure.
with proper presentation, it is a fooler. And everyone in this room, we had 12 students there, and every one of us are just shocked at this magic that he did in 30 seconds. And then he said, "Now I'm going to disappoint you all by showing you how it's done." And that just totally hooked me because I just saw it is incredible how fooling something so simple was. And I just wanted more of it.
Now, was there an area that you were drawn to once you started taking lessons, like cards or coins or mentalism or something?
Well, I suffer from shiny object syndrome. So I tend to like a lot of different things, but in my own performing, I like cards. I like what are called packet tricks, which you guys know. They're, tricks done with cards that are a small number of cards at a time. I tend to really find myself wanting to do more and more packet tricks, but you don't want to just pull out one packet after another packet. So I resist. Um, Close-up magic, because I love the reaction of people when you're in a small group. And I think it's most powerful when you're in a small group. I don't have much interest in ever doing stage magic, but that mid-level of doing parlor, I've done a couple of things in parlor settings, and I enjoy that as well.
Did you have the performer bug before you did this?
Maybe kind of subconsciously, so in my work in forensics, the final act for any forensics case is going to court and presenting in front of a judge and or a jury. And I actually enjoy that. A lot of people don't like it. They feel nervous. They feel like there's a lot of pressure on you. And of course, you have a lawyer cross-examining you, trying to prove everything that you have to say is wrong. But I thrive on that a little bit. So I do enjoy that. I always thought it would be fun to act, but after my junior high school performance, I realized I shouldn't. So
Not everybody does.
What play was that?
I don't remember the play, but what I do remember doing is freezing when it came time for me to deliver my line.
You get over that, George. You should revisit it. It'll get better.
Well, who knows? I started magic at 60. Maybe I'll start acting at 65.
There you go.
Which is what I am now. So
Perfect. Perfect.
So what opportunities do you have to perform magic? Because that's one of the hardest things we run into is amateur magicians have no audience that isn't the same audience.
Well, we have not far from me an open mic that's open mic for pretty much any type of entertainment. So that's in the city of Fullerton near where I live, and that's once a month. So I've done the open mics there on several occasions. I've done some performing at charities. So I have a couple of charities that I'm involved with separately from magic, and so they've given me opportunities to perform a little bit. And then I have friends that own companies that have annual anniversaries or parties, and that's given me a little bit of opportunity to do some walk around magic.
Can I go back to just about your work and how it might sort of tie into magic? You analyze visual data to, let's just say, uncover the truth. Are there parallels between the work of a forensic expert and a magician who's using misdirection and illusion? Are there any cross paths there?
I think there's a ton. But I'm going to take away one of the things you're talking about, which is misdirection and illusion. In my work in forensics, I'm not going to use misdirection or illusion, but a magician needs to technically know what they're doing and need to have it down really, really well. In forensics, you need to really know what you're doing and have it down really, really well. In forensics, before you're working on a case, in having that thing down, you need to practice it. You need to understand exactly what's going to happen. In magic, the same thing. You need to practice, you need to rehearse. And then at the end, it comes down to performance. In magic, you're giving a magical performance. And in forensics, you're giving a testimony in front of a jury. And one of the things that you do in magic is you want to emphasize something over here while de-emphasizing something else over here. In forensics, there might be 10 things that I find, but one thing I want the jury to remember. So I want to really stress, but I have to maybe say everything in the forensics. I'm going to be asked a lot of questions under direct examination, under cross-examination, but I'm going to make sure that the one or two key issues are things that I emphasize. So we have preparation, practice, good knowledge of the technical things, and then presentation at the end. And those all come together, I think, in both fields. And I could say in virtually almost any field, right?
As a mystery writer, I'm always looking to find ways of hiding clues in plain sight. And so that when the reader goes back, looks at it, they go, oh, why didn't I see that before? It's your job to kind of find those things that might be in plain sight for you, but not other people. Is that a good way of looking at it?
Yes, it is. And I'll give an example of a case I worked on in which something was absolutely in plain sight. And this was a officer involved shooting. Officer shot somebody and the person died as a result. And that agency and the district attorney were all reviewing all of the video on that to try to find, there was an allegation that the person that got shot didn't have a gun, and that later on when the gun was found, the police had planted it. So in that case, all of these different investigators, detectives are analyzing the video, looking for any video that shows the gun prior to the person that finds it. And they're coming up short. So they hire me and they say, can you get us something on this? And as I think we all know, video, generally speaking, has less resolution than still photographs, especially if you think about body-worn cameras, which are fairly low resolution, and the current iPhones and Androids that have very high resolution still photographs. So in this particular one of the video shots, there was a police officer that takes a phone out of his pocket, holds it up, and takes some pictures of what looks like it would be a significant area. So I asked where the photographs from that officer were, and nobody knew. And they called up the officer and they said, apparently you're in this video taking a still photograph. Can we get access to it? He goes, oh yeah, I never downloaded it. I'm just using it for myself. Sends over the photo, and you could then see the gun in there before anybody had been there where they thought the gun would have been. So the evidence hidden in plain sight, the officer pulling out his phone, taking a still photograph. Nobody thought to ask him to see those photographs.
It's fantastic.
It really is. This is just so cool to get the inside baseball on this stuff. It's really...
Yeah. And I come out looking like a genius because I said, look, that guy's taking a still photo.
Well, that is
my job's hard
because everybody else had missed it up to that point.
Yes.
Hey, so you mentioned earlier that you analyze the timing of events in videos for your forensic work. Do you think understanding how people perceive time might give an advantage either in magic or in investigations? I know there's something in magic we call time misdirection, which can be very powerful. Talk a little bit about that for us.
Yeah. So the instances when I work on time issues primarily are in officer involved shootings. And it's a matter of determining from the time that the officer sees something to the time that they pull the trigger, how much time elapsed. And maybe by the time they stop shooting, how much time elapsed before that last shot, or what they could have seen. And did they have good reason to be firing their weapon at those particular times? So timing becomes an issue then. And when you watch a video and you don't break it down into that time segment, you might see it one way. After analysis, you might see it another way. So that exact timing that sometimes comes down to milliseconds can become key issues. Same thing with video that's recorded at, let's say, a different than normal speed. So a lot of surveillance cameras record and security-based cameras record at something less than your 30 frames per second. And when played at the wrong speed, we might see an accident occur and we think somebody was driving much faster or much slower than they actually were. And looking at the timing of that, we can actually find out exactly how fast they were going. Well, within a margin of error, we can find out how fast they were going. And that can change our perception then. So in magic, as you mentioned, Jim, we got, the issue of time misdirection. And time misdirection is huge in magic. And I think that understanding the value it has in forensics maybe gets me to appreciate that in a little bit of a different way than magicians do. But I think most competent magicians do understand the value of it and know how to use it well.
You've kind of sparked something in me that your job might have stayed the same over the last number of years, but it's changed in that you now have access to so much more visual information than you used to because there's so much more CCTV out there. Everybody has a phone, everybody's shooting things. What are the pluses and minuses of all of a sudden getting all that information?
Well, for a police agency, it can be overwhelming. And I think we saw a number of years ago, a lot of police labs that were backlogged with DNA evidence, and going and running DNA evidence would take months and sometimes even years because there'd be such a backlog. Well, now we have that, and we have for several years that same situation with video. And there's such a plethora of it. And yes, we have tools that might be able to do things such as look for red vehicles traveling left to right on the video and pull out the segments that do that. So we can save a lot of time using some tools, but there's still so much there. And just looking for a red card traveling from the left to the right is far from what's average in what we're looking for. So it becomes very intensive. For me, of course, it means I will always have a job.
That's good.
Yes.
I like that a lot.
Well, maybe I should go into comedy now, Jim.
Hey,
You're encouraging me.
I'm giggling.
All right.
It's
All
all
right, forget
good.
it. I don't know anything about magic, you guys. It's comedy. I'm going to go now.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the comedy stylings of George Reis. George Reis. Everybody give it up for George Reis. So one of the things that I discovered in doing what little research I did do, I know I did more than Jim, was you had a case involving the forgery of Cameron Diaz's signature in some sort of legal situation. Can you talk to us about an unusual case or a memorable case you've worked on that you felt really made you look at forensics a little bit differently?
So I've had a few memorable cases, and that Cameron Diaz case was one. But when you relate it to how it caused me to look at forensics maybe more significantly, when I was working at the Newport Beach Police Department and I was doing crime scene investigation, and I was new at that particular role in my career there, we had a commercial fire, so an office building, 3-story office building that had been burglarized and lit on fire. And the other 2 crime scene investigators that I worked with at the time were unavailable. They were out of town, unavailable. And I had this 3-story building pretty much to myself that I needed to go through and find the evidence in this case to try to help figure out where the fire started, how it started, what was stolen, who stole it, who lit the fire, and so on. Huge, huge, huge job. And in that particular case, I did 2 things that I think helped me in all of my forensics work, as well as pretty much anything I do. Number 1, break it down into smaller pieces. So look at this thing and say, okay, 3 separate floors, each floor divided up into separate sections, and treat each one individually, and then look at things as a whole. So that was one piece, one aspect of that case that really helped me. And then another one was call in help. And so what I did is I called up our county, Orange County Sheriff's Office, and I said, hey, do you have anyone that can come out here and help me with this scene? I'm here alone. And they sent out a couple of people. So we divided up the work, and we each did our work independently. Then we got together and combined the information that we found. So same thing in magic, same thing in anything that I do in my life. Get a coach, listen to what the coach says, do what the coach says, work hard, and break things down into component parts.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. Particularly that idea of breaking it to pieces, because sometimes you look at something that's completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
I know that sometimes Jim is in a play and he has a whole play in his head, but as he taught me when we were doing A Christmas Carol, you're really only just doing the next scene. That's all you're doing is the next scene, and then worry about the next scene after that, and breaking things down that way is, really helpful, really smart.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you also provide training to organizations like the FBI and the Secret Service. What do you emphasize when training others in forensic image and video analysis?
Well, something that I think is important to emphasize, not necessarily to those two groups because they already know this, but when I do teach various aspects of forensic image and video analysis, is not to do anything unless you absolutely know that what you're doing correctly. It's really easy to learn a technique and misapply it. And then you come out with the wrong result and then you find yourself in trouble. So I think making sure that we stay within our lane and within our level of knowledge and within our level of experience. So when I teach a particular technique, I often will tell everyone, don't take my word for this. Go out and get other images, other video, experiment with it, do it over and over again, understand how it's working, and make sure that you're getting results that are consistent with the process that you're doing before you use it on a case.
Boy, I can see an immediate analogy to magic there about
Absolutely.
don't use this just because you know a technique doesn't mean that's the right technique for this particular
Nor,
trick.
nor just because you learned something by watching a video does it mean that you should go out and try to perform it in front of an audience.
On the nosy.
For those of you who can't see Jim, and that's everybody, he's just touching his finger to his nose. That's on the nose. You know, we talked about the plethora of cameras that are out there now in the world that are providing you with, steady employment and also lots more stuff to go through. What have been for you the significant advancements in the field, let's say in the last 10 years, and how have they changed the way you work?
I think that the ability to analyze file structures and some aspects of the content of an image. So file structure, stuff that's outside of the photograph or the video itself, but that compose the file, the MOV, AVI, MP4 file, or the JPEG image file have become very significant. And there's excellent tools for analyzing that file structure, the metadata, and other components of it from a technical standpoint. And we have some excellent tools for also looking at certain visual aspects of those things to help me and others in my field understand where to look visually for indications of falsification of images or alterations of images. So the field of image and video authentication, determining if a photo's been photoshopped, if a video is a deep fake, the tools to analyze those things have become pretty phenomenal. Very, very good tools that are out there. And then, of course, along with that, the tools to falsify photographs and video have become better, and more accessible to a lot of people. So from that standpoint, there's always a need for those tools to improve. So I think in the area of authentication, we have better tools, more tools. They do fascinating things, but we're getting harder cases now too.
So you raise an interesting point. These are experts who are dealing with it. I know a few years back we had an impressionist on chatting with Jim Meskimen, who's a great impressionist, and he had some deep fake videos made of him doing impressions, and a computer artist went in and changed Jim's face so that as he's doing the impressions, he began to look like the people he was doing the impressions of. And the way he designed that video was the changes were so subtle, and he was also doing things with his own face that it wasn't until he got to Morgan Freeman that I went, "Oh, wait a second, now he's black. They must be doing something." So for an average person without the technical background that you have, what advice do you give to people when it comes to looking at something that appears online or a video they see? How can they sort of figure out, hey, that's real, hey, that's not real?
It's so scary right now because there's so much of this out there, and you have to sort of sift through what's real and what isn't real. And is this, I, how do you check it all as just a guy like me off the street? You've got some tools and stuff, but for just a schmo from St. Paul, what do I do here in order to understand what is that real? Should I share that? Should I not share that? How do I know?
Well, I think the best advice I could give you is throw away your computer. Um, then you have nothing to look at and you don't need to worry about it.
All right. It's good
But I don't
advice.
think you're going to take that advice, are you?
It's good advice. I'm not going to take it, but it's good advice.
So one thing I would say is common sense. Does it make sense that this person would be saying this particular thing, would be in this particular situation? And then obviously look at sources. So you look up whatever the particular topic is and look for scam or something like that in your search terms. But the other thing I would look at is synchronization between, the mouth movement and what's being said.
Mm-hmm.
So if things seem to go out of synchronization, or if the mouth shape doesn't seem right, that's going to be good. Look at eyes. Eyes are difficult. Well, currently, but we'll see next week.
Yeah.
Currently difficult to get good. Look at blinking. Let's see if the blinking is occurring in a natural pace. See if there's breaks in that shouldn't exist. Look for any kind of movements that seem the least bit unnatural or overly natural. So if a person, and look for the typical ways that people break up their speech. I think that when people do impersonations, one of the things they find is there's certain glitches in the way people talk, or maybe they commonly repeat the same thing. And so when they do that type of a habitual type of phrasing, then look for that and see if it falls into place, and see if it seems too mechanical.
And if it's a still photo, count the number of fingers. That's always a good. I found that to be a good indicator.
It would be, of course, assuming you know the number of fingers the person should have.
That's true. That's true. So looking back over a storied career, what's the best piece of advice that you've heard? And I'm going to break that into two parts. Best piece of life advice you've heard, and best piece of advice that wasn't related to magic, but that you now relate to magic.
Good question.
Wow. So I'm going to go back to the breaking things down into small component parts. I think that's just great in everything. You set a goal, and what do you do when you set a goal? You say, well, what are the steps involved in achieving the goal? And then from there, what is the first step I then need to take? So you take the large issue, you break it into small issues, and then you determine what the first action item for that is. And I think that's great advice, period. But the other thing that I think has come up more recently than piece of advice that kind of becomes related to things since I learned magic, because usually things that I've done have come fairly easily to me. And starting magic at the age of 60, it doesn't come quite as easily. And so the thing is, just work hard. And, sometimes that's hard to do. It's easy to be distracted. I told you earlier, I have shiny object syndrome. I love Oscar Wilde's statement, I can resist anything except temptation. So it's easy to go in 100 directions, but focusing and practicing and working hard are just absolutely essential.
The basics.
Yes. I'm just looking at my co-host, who is the epitome of shiny object
Oh, boy.
syndrome.
Yeah. It's easy. The world is tempting. There's so much out there.
There really is. What's your favorite thing in magic right now?
Well, I definitely love the fact that there's so many resources out there. There's a million books. There's a million ways to learn to do magic. There's, going to lectures by magicians. There's reading their books. There's seeing videos that are recorded that teach how to do some of the things that a magician has created. So having all of those resources and having them so easily available, you go into Vanishing Ink or any of the magic dealers, and you type in something, and the next thing you do, you see 10 books you can order right then, and something, a trick you can buy, and a video you can download. And I hate that as well. It feeds into my shiny object syndrome.
Yeah, me too.
Where do you see yourself headed now that you've got 5 years under your belt? Where are we going to see you doing magic? Are you going to try out for Fulas? You're going to try to do more stage work? Are you looking for something regular in magic? What's your vision? What's your 5-year plan?
Yeah, and 5-year plan is a good plan because I still enjoy my forensics work. And so I do it and I stay busy with it. So I don't have any intent to retire soon from this work. But I think walk around magic at restaurants would be a lot of fun, and I could see myself as starting to pursue something along those lines. And then also, I like to tie my magic into my forensics work. So from that standpoint, I can see myself as I perform in maybe parlor type settings, doing things that maybe bring an interest to people who are interested in magic and who are interested in forensics.
I don't want to tell you how to run your life, but you've got such an interesting backstory, and
Really?
you are a good performer presenter, and you're smart. I really think if you came up with, without trying to fool Penn and Teller, but just come up with a trick that ties into forensics, the producers of that show are going to go, yes, we'd love
So
that, because
why?
that's what they want, is a great story to hook into, and then someone who can perform. And then the fooling is, entirely separate. But I don't know what the trick is, but I'm just saying, I think there's something there if you ever wanted to go down that path.
I agree. Yeah, I
Then,
agree.
then Jim, I need your help in getting over that freezing on stage.
Hey, it's a doing thing. You're gonna be fine. Break it into small. Take it a word at a time, George.
There you
Well,
go.
George, if you can handle cross-examination by someone who's
Yeah,
trying to shoot you down as an expert in a tough field that the jury doesn't necessarily totally understand, I think you can handle Penn staring you down, or any audience member staring you down at that point. You've got the
absolutely.
goods.
I appreciate that.
I think Penn and Teller would love George. They love a good story.
Yeah, I think that's really sound advice, and I hope he hears it and takes advantage of that, because I agree. I think if he focused on his sort of job and then created a magic trick that was, boy, I think they would eat that with a spoon. Heck, I would eat that with a spoon.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
So,
fascinating guy.
fascinating guy. I loved the idea that the Magic Castle gift shop has nabbed another magician in the making, and also his mention of the easy button. Wouldn't it be great if
Oh,
we had an
super.
easy button in life?
Hey, how did we find George? That
He just reached out to me because he was enjoying the Eli Marks books, and he wanted to let me know that at age 60 he'd become a magician. I found that fascinating. And as I've said, the other podcasts out there, Damien's podcast for Vanishing Ink, and Eric Tate over at Penguin, and of course the GOAT, greatest of all time, Scott Wells, with the Magic Word podcast. They've done, well, he and they have done yeoman's work on getting the best magicians in the world to sit down and talk about their craft. And I love doing that too, as evidenced by the fact that we've got 30 some hours or whatever of great interviews. But I also really love talking to people like George, for whom it isn't the central focus in their life, which I think is important to becoming better at being a performer. If that isn't the central focus of your life, if you have something else to draw from, as I've learned from you, because this is not the central focus of your life.
You know, we haven't mentioned him yet. The patron saint of this podcast, Eugene Berger, was a big fan of Al Baker.
Mhm.
I don't know if that name rings a bell with you, but
He
Al
does.
Baker came to magic late in terms of it being his primary focus, and Eugene really loved that and felt like he was coming to magic as his focus late in life,
Yep.
because he had done plenty of other things, social service work, and so there is a precedent here,
Yes.
and it's a pretty good precedent. Al Baker, Eugene Berger,
Yeah.
George Reis, maybe. I don't know, but it's just it's cool when somebody brings their life journey to magic. It's really, anything could happen at that point.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Another thing that he said that I think will come up a couple episodes from now when we talk to Magical Katrina, because she has the same thought about, if you break projects into smaller steps, it becomes much more manageable and it isn't as overwhelming. And I certainly have noticed that in writing books, that, I'm not writing the whole book, I'm just writing the next chapter. And as you have always said to me as your actor advice, the few times I've stepped on stage in A Christmas Carol, you always say, we're just doing this scene.
Yep.
You're not doing the whole play. You're just doing this scene.
Yeah, it is really good advice. I don't often take it, even though I believe in it, but I should. When he said it, I was like, "Gosh, dang it, that is so smart," and I know it, and I don't do it as often as I should. So, on behalf of all of us who are maybe Johnny-come-latelys to the idea of breaking things into small portions in order to achieve a big goal. I'm going to embrace that going forward.
Yeah, it's very smart advice. I mean, I imagine that we're romanticizing his job and that it might be, as tedious as other jobs can get, but on the surface,
Very cool.
very cool. And for someone he is younger than I am, I believe, but to embrace technology to the degree that he has and to understand technology and understand what it can and can't do, that's fantastic. He's talking about, for him in his business, time misdirection is a big thing, and it certainly is in magicians' worlds. That add up, that all ties together like that. And then the piece of advice that I should have. Well, I don't necessarily need to get a tattoo for it because I don't think I've done it. But this idea of when I first heard Malcolm Gladwell talk about, the Beatles had 10,000 hours of performing in the cellar in Berlin or whatever they were, Hamburg, wherever it was.
Hamburg.
And that's why they're so great. And he may have mentioned it in that book, but if you're doing it wrong for 10,000 hours, you're not going to be great. So the key is to do it correctly for 10,000 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we can think of performers who have been doing it for over 10,000 hours and are still doing it wrong.
That's correct.
So it's a little caveat, but it's an important caveat to the whole 10,000 hours. Anyways, great chatting with George. He sent me a nice email a few days ago after our last episode with some ideas of what he thinks we could do on the podcast moving forward and some suggestions that I thought were very interesting. So anyway, that's George. That's the kind of guy or gal we want to talk to next season.
Smart guy.
Yeah, if you know someone who has that sort of amazing backstory, like our friend Dr. Reed Quinton, who happens to be a coroner who does magic. Those things are just fascinating. George also recommended talking to mystery writers, which you and I have talked about before. We get a couple mystery writers on here. I like to talk to mystery writers who do magic, though. So anyway, we'll keep working on that.
You may be the only one.
I can't be. I cannot be. I cannot be. No. Okay. We're going to move ahead because it is now what is becoming a favorite segment, the I Love That segment. And I'm curious as to what you have for us today.
Yeah, 513 odd means I go first. I think I mentioned in the interview with George that I am kind of an Old West buff and ask questions about a particular photograph of Billy the Kid. So I revisited, coincidentally, one of my favorite Westerns. And it's interesting to me.
Can I just take a guess?
Yeah.
It's one of two.
Well, I don't think you're going to get it, but take a shot.
It's either Lonesome Dove or Silverado.
Both are way up there for me. And if I was going to pick a favorite movie, how crazy is this? It would be Silverado.
Okay, so that's close.
I'm going to have a private screening of Silverado. It's going to be at night, which may rule you out, but I'll invite you anyway. It's a private screening at the Landmark Center. How about that, huh?
So you want me to go out at night and then go to downtown St. Paul? Boy, you just...
you finish for Coney Islands at the Gopher Bar beforehand.
I think you might as well just put it on the moon to be just as likely that I'd go.
So it's interesting to me that of the movies I revisit on a fairly regular basis, and by that I mean at least once a year, Kevin Costner is in a lot of them. And I don't know why that he's in Silverado. I love Dances with Wolves. I can't watch Field of Dreams anymore since my dad died, but Field of Dreams would be up there for me. A lot of movies that I revisit, Kevin Costner is in, and this is one of them that it always sort of drops off my radar, and then suddenly it'll pop up in a weird way, and I'll go, oh, I haven't watched that in 3 years. It's a film called Open Range that he did with Robert Duvall.
Beautiful country. Man can get lost out here. Forget there's people and things that ain't so simple as this. How long we been riding together, Charlie?
Nigh on 10 years.
Mm-hmm. You know what they call that? Call it a decade.
and Duvall is essentially playing Gus from Lonesome Dove. There's 3 movies where it's a trilogy as Gus, but it's a great Western, and it's absolutely worth your 2 hours. Have you seen it, John?
I have not seen it, and I have just barely heard of it. So
It's
be worth exploring.
it's pretty bloody.
Okay.
So that may turn some people off, but it's very well done. And strangely, the second Dumbledore is the main bad guy. Michael Gambon plays the evil villain in this, and you don't see that very often because he's such a likable actor. But boy, he is really a bad guy in this thing.
Well, he's also the bad guy in Gosford Park. I believe he's the victim
Oh,
of Gosford Park. And we had,
right. I guess I didn't remember that.
yeah, we got to see him do Pinter's No Man's Land live in London
Wow,
about a week after Pinter died.
you are the king.
We are the kings of everything. Yeah, no, he's my favorite Michael Gambon story. I'm sure everybody has their own favorite Michael Gambon story, but apparently on one of the first days of shooting when he became Dumbledore, he in whatever as they're blocking the scene, as the character began to run down the hall, and somebody in authority said, "Oh, no, Dumbledore doesn't run," and he replied, "This one does," which I think was an important point that he was making. He wasn't doing Richard Harris,
Yeah.
Dumbledore. He was doing Michael Gambon. Well, that sounds fascinating. Open range.
You love John. Open range.
Jump up. It's funny because my I love it this time is the idea of keeping your range door open in order to heat the kitchen.
I like, yeah, it's
What are the odds of that you would have
cost effective.
No, mine is also a movie that I was recalling recently because it's just darn funny and very, very clever and stars one of my favorite and most unlikely movie stars, Sam Rockwell.
Oh, I love Sam Rockwell.
Sam Rockwell is fantastic in everything. First, remember seeing him in Galaxy Quest.
In anything he does, he is charming beyond belief. In fact, I just looked him up this morning. I wonder if it's going to be the movie that you're about to name.
I'm about to name the movie See How They Run.
Oh, no.
Which is it's a murder mystery comedy set in the 1950s London. It's set in the real world of the opening of Agatha Christie's play The Mousetrap, which opened in the 50s. And there is a murder that happens.
Victim's name is Leo Kopernik, sir. Seems he was killed in the costume store. And then he was deposited here. Staged, so to speak. Sorry, sir.
And your seat.
How much longer do you intend to hold us all hostage?
Or is that the idea? Gather all the suspects and interrogate each of us in turn until the mystery's solved?
Marvin Cocker-Norris, overrated playwright.
Celebrated, playwright?
Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. I can't read my own handwriting.
And Sam Rockwell plays the detective who's brought in to solve the case. It has all kinds of mystery and Agatha Christie related Easter eggs and jokes in it. One of my favorite ones is referring to Lothario. I believe the constable says he's a real hound inspector, which made me laugh because of Tom Stoppard's mystery play, The Real Inspector Hound. It co-stars Adrian Brody, who we remember as Houdini from when we talked to Nicholas Meyer.
Yeah, he's fabulous.
And he's Reese Shearsmith, who is one of the 2 stars and writers of Inside Number 9, which was I love that a little while back.
Yeah.
So it's a delightfully funny and clever movie that if you like mysteries or if you like making fun of mysteries, I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's all over the place. It's called See How They Run.
Well, I will absolutely, because I love Sam Rockwell. So I will, and I'm not going to tell you the movie I looked up this morning because it could show up as one of my I love that's. Did you know, you brought up The Real Inspector Hound. That was the first play I did in college at the U where we both went.
And that was the first time I ever saw you as the dead body on the stage.
They put a note up on the call board. We're looking for an actor that's willing to play the dead body
Mhm.
You have no lines. You're dead at the beginning of the play, and you're still dead at the end. Is there anybody interested? I took the thing down right away, and I said, I'll do it. I was a freshman or something. I said, I'll absolutely do it.
So
And I made a lifelong friend.
is that where you met Jay Nickerson?
Yeah, and Fred Wagner, too.
Yeah, okay.
And Paul Laxo, who I ended up living with for a while.
Yeah.
In his house. So, yeah, it was, that's a great play, funny play, and I was the dead body.
Well, I don't know if he listens to this podcast, but that was the first time I saw Jay Nickerson. I was delighted by him. He was very funny in that show.
He's
As
a
a
genius.
as a theater critic who gets pulled on stage during a show, and he's a very sophisticated British, highfalutin kind of guy, and he has spent the next 40 years of my life trying to prove to me that that's not who he is, that he's just this schlub.
He's a great guy. All right, listen, enough fun. We got to get down to business.
Yes.
If I've done the math, last time I read chapter 12, this is episode 13, so I think I'm right.
Yep.
Before I launch into chapter 13, just recap the 12 like you do.
I will try to do that. I believe in chapter 12, I think Harry was interviewed again. He went into the police with Baxter's solicitor. They talked about poisoned tea bags in Boris's stash because that's how Boris was killed. We also learned a little bit more about Uncle Harry's history with McHugh, which came about during the suicide of Archie Banks some 30 or 40 years before. After this unproductive interview, Harry and Eli visit Davenport's magic shop, and the clerk there, Liam, performs one of Eli's own tricks and shows him lecture notes for that trick that he can buy that were written by Jake North.
Jake, come on. Chapter 13. Breathe. I am breathing. Honey, I think you think you're breathing, but to me it looks like you're hyperventilating. Megan and I were in the midst of a whispered debate about my alleged inhalation and exhalation skills, standing behind the last row of seats in the Magic Circle's small theater. A chaotic rehearsal was taking place on stage, with DeVries overseeing the final touches on the Davis DeVries Catherine wheel before one lucky magician got to give the trick a spin, as it were. That lucky magician was Jake North, and I'd made a point of avoiding him so far. I needed to maintain some distance, as I was unsure what might come out of my mouth when we finally came face to face. Sensing my volatile emotional state, Megan had suggested she come along with me to the rehearsal to provide moral support. I thanked her, but reminded her she would, during the course of such a rehearsal, likely see how the trick worked, which was something she always hated to discover. "Don't worry," she cheerfully replied. "Knowing me, I'll forget the whole thing the next day." I had to admit this was a fair assessment of her retention abilities, at least as it related to magical secrets. And I had to admit I was pleased to have her by my side during these first few moments when I might be encountering Jake. She had been supportive since the moment I had told her about Jake's latest betrayal. "Why would he bother doing a lecture?" Megan had asked after I recounted my experience at Davenport's magic shop. That thought had not, until that moment, occurred to me. Leave it to Megan to once again find the most pertinent question inside a thorny situation. "He certainly doesn't need the money," she continued as she mused on the topic. "No, he certainly doesn't," I agreed. "Maybe he does it to make himself feel like a big-shot magician," she suggested. "I mean, back at home, when you sponsor lectures at the magic store, it's usually with only the best magicians out there, right?" "That's right," I said, mentally running down a list of some of the amazing performers who had graced our small back room, offering precious secrets to a handful of local magicians gathered around in folding chairs. "So maybe Jake figures if he does a lecture, he must be a big-shot magician," she concluded, and I found no reason to argue with her logic. "Tell me again about the karmic wheel," I asked. "It always turns," she said warmly, and I immediately felt better. if only a little. After learning about the depth of Jake's deceit at Davenport's magic shop, I opted to keep the information close to my chest, at least for the time being. I recognized DeVries was counting on making a splash with his new illusion, and I figured I could put off my inevitable confrontation with Jake until after the big premiere on Saturday night. So for the time being, Megan and I stood in the back of the house and observed the chaos on stage. "People, we need to make some progress here," DeVries said to everyone and no one in particular. "What's preventing us from running this top to bottom? What's the holdup, people?" He looked at the two stagehands who had finished positioning the large wheel, the two female assistants who were practicing their handiwork with a large silk, and then at Jake Norton, who was leaning against a pillar and checking his phone. Jake glanced up and saw the look on DeVries' face. "What's the holdup, people?" Jake repeated, pocketing his phone and stepping to the center of the stage. His semi-celebrity status seemed to carry more authority than anything DeVries was doing, and everyone snapped to immediate attention. "Are we ready to try this sucker?" This was followed by general sounds of assent, and moments later, music began to blast out of the speakers as lights shifted on stage and everyone took his or her place. The volume of the music then jumped up several notches. "Why does it have to be so loud?" Megan practically yelled in my ear. "In magic, music is either loud to help build energy or to cover a sound that might give away how the trick works," I explained. "Or more often than not, both." Unable to hear me, Megan just shrugged, and I nodded that I too thought the music was a tad too loud. I turned back to the stage to see that Jake had already positioned himself on the wheel, and the two female assistants were in the midst of securing him to the structure. I felt a presence to my right and turned to see Angelica had taken a position next to me to observe the rehearsal. She had a scowl on her face, which may have been directed at the large-scale illusion or at the two scantily clad women currently tying a willing magician to it. She turned to me and said something I couldn't quite decipher. "What?" She must have taken my one-word response as a suitable answer, for she continued on with what appeared to be, without being able to actually hear it, a short but passionate diatribe. I didn't make out most of it, but I did catch bloody box jumpers before she turned and headed toward the theater's rear doors, clearly disgusted by the traditional gender stereotypes being exhibited on stage. She would have made a solid dramatic exit if someone hadn't stepped into the theater just as she was attempting to step out. It was Miss Hess, who definitely did not step aside, forcing the younger woman to snake around her in order to get through the doorway. Once again, I couldn't hear what Angelica had to say, but the tone of her short exchange with Miss Hess came through loud and clear via body language and harsh facial expressions. Miss Hess turned and glared at her, and then, perhaps because the object of her scorn was no longer visible, she turned her glare on me. I quickly returned my attention to the stage. A few moments later, when I felt it was safe to sneak a look back at the doorway, I was relieved to discover the scary old woman was no longer standing in the entryway. A cold finger gave my shoulder a hard stab, and I turned to see she was now standing directly behind me. Whatever sound of surprise I made was probably drowned out by the ear-splitting music. However, I suspect it was so high that only dogs would have heard it anyway. "Have you seen Herr Baxter?" she asked. Surprisingly, her voice cut right through the cacophony, and I had no trouble understanding her. Puzzled by the physics of that, I shook my head dumbly. "I saw him earlier backstage," I shouted, "but not lately." "His presence is requested in the executive director's office," she said, her voice again cutting directly through the music. I shrugged impotently, and she gave me a look that suggested, at least to my mind, she had never before encountered a more incompetent fool. She then turned and moved slowly out the door. If anyone was ever to deserve the title of living ghost, it was Miss Hess. I waited a moment for my goose flesh to subside and then once again returned my attention to the rehearsal. The music had reached a fever pitch, and so had the spinning of the Catherine wheel, sparks flying out of the end of its spokes. The two box jumpers each climbed on a small step next to the device and, in shaky unison, held up a large 8-foot square opaque silk with as much drama and panache as they could muster for this first rehearsal. Jake, who was just a blur now on the spinning wheel, was obscured behind the thin silk, disappearing from our view. Although I only vaguely understood the principles of the trick, I knew this was when all the action was happening behind the oversized silk. Somehow, Jake was getting off the wheel, while from the audience perspective, it still continued to revolve and spark at a furious rate. The glitzy assistants would soon drop the silk, revealing an empty, spinning disc, and then moments later, Jake would appear, triumphant somewhere else in the theater. I glanced around, curious to see what location they had chosen for this surprise manifestation. The spot for Jake's return turned out to be a surprise to everyone, not the least of whom were the two young ladies holding up the silk. One moment it was parallel to the Catherine wheel, and the next it was ripped from their hands as Jake stumbled face forward, collapsing with a hard thud upon the stage. He lay there, motionless, the wheel and its flashes of flames spinning crazily behind him as the two assistants stared down in shock at the prone figure sprawled in front of them. Both stagehands rushed toward the body, then stepped back several feet from the crumpled form, clearly unsure of what their responsibilities were in this new situation. Any fear that he was the latest magician to come to an untimely end was quickly abated as Jake painfully pushed himself up off the floor onto his elbows, confirming to one and all he was still alive. And then, to drive his point home even further, he proceeded to vomit all over the stage, repeatedly, with great volume and gusto. As performances go, it was one for the record books. Megan, always squeamish about this sort of thing, turned to me as the music and the flaming wheel came to a screeching halt. People began to run to his aid, then stepped back, not sure he had finished his impromptu showstopper. "Remember what I said about the karmic wheel?" she said. "I do." She looked down at the stage and the writhing, sickening, and sick mess which was Jake North. "It always turns," she said, with a smile the Cheshire Cat would have been proud to call his own. Rehearsal was suspended while the stage and Jake were cleaned up. At the same time, a search went out for another 8-foot silk, the current one being considered an utter loss. News of the fiasco traveled quickly, and soon two of the magnificent magi who were hanging out at the Magic Circle, Roy Templeton and Uncle Harry, joined Megan and me in the back of the theater to offer their respective 2 cents on the recent turn of events. We all looked down the aisle at Davis DeVries, who paced in front of the stage, running and rerunning a hand through his crisp white head of hair. "Poor man can't catch a break," Harry muttered. "This will definitely hurt sales," Roy said in a matching somber tone. "I mean, who wants to buy an illusion that requires the front 2 rows to wear rain ponchos? Although," he added, brightening, "it worked for that comedian Gallagher back in the 80s. "He was sledgehammering watermelons," Harry said. Roy nodded. "Yes, I suppose that's an easier sell than tossing cookies like Linda Blair." Megan moaned at the image as Roy, now on a roll, stepped forward and spun around, facing the small group. He rubbed his hands together excitedly. "I got the solution," he said. "All he has to do is rebrand it. Instead of the Catherine wheel, he simply needs to call it the Wheel of Nausea. Wait, strike that," he said as another idea occurred to him. It would be the Davis DeVries wheel of nausea. It's trademarked, after all. We all said nothing, for experience had taught us there was no stopping Roy once he got going. And the more you tried to stop him, the worse it got. Silence was our only weapon, and we used it. Or the Davis DeVries vomitorium, he continued. That one has a classical ring to it with some nice alliteration. Or the Pukinator, the Tilt-A-Hurl. Harry held up a hand and pushed past him, silencing Roy, if only for a few moments. Harry extended his hand to DeVries, who was just coming up the aisle. Doctor, how you holding up? Harry asked. DeVries shook his head. Doctor, I'm at my wit's end, he said quietly. I know the damn thing will work. It'll be brilliant. But roadblocks keep popping up out of nowhere. That last one looked more like roadkill, Roy said. We all suppressed anything resembling a chuckle, so Roy quickly switched to a more somber attitude. Sorry, Doctor, he said, patting DeVries' back. Rough business, I know. DeVries sighed and then straightened up, squaring his shoulders and holding his head up high. I guess the only thing to do is talk to Baxter about canceling the premiere. If what happened this afternoon were to happen in front of a paying audience, can you imagine what those jokesters down there, he said, gesturing to the meeting room on the main floor, can you imagine what names they would be calling the Catherine Wheel? Everyone is sympathetic to what you're going through, Harry said, pointedly looking at Roy Templeton, who had suddenly adopted an expression of great contrition. And it's not like you to give up. You've run into problems with new illusions before. You've always powered through them. I was younger then, DeVries said. Nonsense, Harry said, putting his arm around his old friend's shoulder. Who was it who said, the best idea is often the next idea? Di Vernon, Roy said quickly. Charlie Miller. No, it was Alex Elmsley. Or maybe Ganson. It was you, Harry said emphatically to DeVries, but even he couldn't help crack a smile at the antics of the old jokester. And then Harry's smile helped coax a smile out of DeVries, and soon the old friends were laughing about the situation and offering ways to put a positive spin on it. Look, pal, just because that Hollywood hack has a sensitive tum-tum is no reason to put a fork in the Catherine Wheel, Roy said, giving DeVries a playful punch on the arm. It's friggin' brilliant, and the world needs to see it. You can't give up after one untimely barf. You and I both know this city is teeming with magicians who would give their eye teeth for a chance to be the first to publicly perform a Davis DeVries illusion, Harry said. You don't need a quote-unquote big name on your device, he added, gesturing toward the gleaming disc on stage. That's right, because there's already a big name on the wheel, Roy said, picking up Harry's pep talk tone. And that big name is Davis DeVries. Cue the orchestra. Roy held up DeVries' arms and waved them from side to side while making the sound of a cheering crowd. To help out, I offered some audio backup, producing a quick series of whistles and cheers. Our general boisterousness seemed to be pulling DeVries out of his funk. Harry and Megan couldn't help but be drawn into the spirited mix, adding their own laughter and applause. Then, one by one, they each grew quiet. I was the last to realize something was up by the looks on everyone else's faces. I turned to where they were looking, and my last shout was cut off in mid-yelp. Lawrence Baxter was standing just inside the theater's main entry, Gareth Mackenzie at his side. Behind them, I recognized Detective Inspector Matthews and two other similarly dressed and serious men. DeVries lowered his arms and straightened his suit coat, running a quick hand through his unruffled hair. The rest of us stood frozen, waiting for the announcement Baxter was clearly poised to make. Megan took my hand and squeezed it, and I wrapped my other hand around hers. I'm sorry to report, Baxter said, his voice not coming out as strongly as he thought it would. There is more bad news, I'm afraid. He turned to Detective Inspector Matthews and then back to us. "There's been another death," he finally said, although by that point the pronouncement was hardly a surprise. "And there is a thought I may in some way be involved. I'm leaving with these fine folks for some questioning. Sorry to miss the rest of the rehearsal." With that, Baxter turned and was escorted out of the theater by the police. "Baxter a murderer? Impossible!" Davis DeVries spat out the words. "You might as well say Harry is a murderer." Harry smiled wryly. "Actually, the police hold that same suspicion," he replied quietly. "Makes me wonder why they took Baxter this time and not me." Although I didn't say it out loud, I had wondered that same thought. I was not proud of the relief I was taking now that Baxter was apparently the focus of the investigation, if only because it took some of the interest off my uncle. The rehearsal had been abandoned, at least for the time being, and there appeared to be no immediate answers available on who had been killed or why Baxter had been taken in for questioning. So our small group made its way down the block and around the corner to Chat Tandoori, an Indian restaurant much beloved by members of the Magic Circle. We were early for lunch and appeared to have the restaurant to ourselves. At the sound of the door opening, the waiter peered out at us from the kitchen, surprised to see customers arriving so soon. Moments after we were seated, Roy Templeton, who had been pacing in front of the restaurant, rejoined us, holding up his cell phone triumphantly. "Got hold of Roxanne," he said, relief evident in his voice. "She's alive and well out at Baxter's Folly. She said she'd do a quick head count to see who may be missing out there on the heath." At that moment, I realized how nervous he must have been, given the open-ended nature of Baxter's pronouncement. I'd not gone down the same mental path about my own loved ones, as both had been with me all morning. And for that matter, both were seated on either side of me, Megan looking through the large menu and Harry checking a text on his phone. "McHugh is either on his way or he's here," he said to the group. And as if the universe had set out to prove him right, McHugh chose that moment to walk through the front door. As the only people in the restaurant, we were easy to spot. He moved toward us and Harry pulled a chair over from a nearby table to add him to our party. All conversation at the table stopped as he settled in. Harry asked the key question we all had. "So, who was murdered?" McHugh started to say something, but stopped as the waiter approached the table and put a glass of water in front of him. When asked if he wanted anything else to drink, McHugh ordered tea and then turned his attention back to us. "I just got off the phone with a friend of mine at the yacht," he said, stopping for a moment to take a sip of water. Somehow, this seemed to inspire Davis DeVries and Roy Templeton to also take a quick drink from their own glasses. Iced tea for DeVries and a dark ale for Roy. "I'm sorry to report Hector Hechizo was found dead this morning in a hotel about 3 kilometers from here," McHugh continued. McHugh's statement produced a series of overlapping questions from the group. How was he killed? When was he killed? Why is Baxter a suspect? And he waited patiently until all of our questions had been expressed. "The method of the killing suggests a perpetrator with a more than rudimentary understanding of medical procedures," he said slowly. "It appears Mr. Hechizo was killed via what I can only term as something akin to bloodletting. That is, a series of, in this case, hundreds of small cuts covering the entirety of the victim's body." "Like being nibbled at death by ducks," Roy said quietly, and McHugh nodded at the analogy. "That's not far off. It was the sheer number of cuts which resulted in enough blood loss to cause death. And what's most unsettling about the procedure," he added grimly, "is there is every indication the victim was conscious and aware the entire time." How is that even possible? DeVries said. Was he bound and gagged? McHugh shook his head. The preliminary report suggests a paralytic drug of some kind was used. Such a drug would essentially freeze all the muscles in the body, allowing the victim to be awake through the entire ordeal, regardless of how long it might have taken. And the police believe it took a good long while indeed. But, DeVries said, leaning forward, the lungs, the heart, breathing. Exactly, McHugh said. For the patient to survive while under the effects of such a drug, he would have to be intubated with a breathing tube or device of some kind. Well, I can see how that would suggest someone with a medical background, DeVries said. But Baxter hasn't practiced in over 30 years. 40, if it's a day, Roy added. He gave up medicine virtually right after he got out of school. Be that as it may, McHugh said as the waiter set a cup of tea in front of him, it is the shiny object which currently has the attention of the force, and until something shinier comes along... He took a long sip of tea. Hundreds of little cuts, Harry repeated, almost to himself. McHugh looked over at him. Well, that's the thing, Harry, he said, setting the cup back in its saucer. That was how it was first described to me, but the second time my contact said it, he referred to it differently. He said, and I quote, "It must have been 1,000 cuts." This phrasing clearly brought Harry up short. He blinked at McHugh, started to say something, stopped, and then started again. That was the phrase? 1,000 cuts? It was indeed. Taken on its own, that's a unique expression, but when you put it into context with the other two murders... He let his words hang in the air as Harry processed what he was hearing. A stabbing, then poison, McHugh continued slowly. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Harry finally said. Often, McHugh replied, and then turned to the group. Harry and I have the amusing habit of occasionally landing on the exact same thought at the exact same moment. And unless I miss my guess, we have done that again. Am I right? Harry nodded, slowly, and the two men considered this silently for what felt like a long time. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. So what the heck are you two thinking? I said, making no effort to temper my exasperation. Harry looked over at me and then at the group. He was clearly choosing his words with great care. We're thinking the evidence suggests the possibility our murderer might be none other than Archie Banks. This produced a shocked reaction from everyone around the table. I mean, actual gasps, jaws dropping, the whole 9 yards. But Archie died over 30 years ago, Davis DeVries finally said. Yes, McHugh said, looking over at Harry, who nodded in agreement. That is presently the one sticking point in our theory.
Yes, the fact that Archie Banks has been dead for so long would be the one sticking point in that theory, but who knows? Who knows?
Hey.
Stranger things have happened.
Absolutely. But you don't know. We just don't know at this point.
Yeah, and if anyone with an eagle eye who wants to correct me, I think this is the first and only vomiting ever in an Eli Marks book, I think. And the other thing that stood out for me was Megan's line about the karmic wheel.
I love that.
Yeah, I had a friend who had he was going to create his own karmic wheel that worked on a ratchet system, because the problem with the karmic wheel is you don't want it to go backwards, and his ratchet karmic wheel would never go. I don't think he ever patented that, but
You got it. We'll put it in the show notes.
yeah, we'll be right there. Anyway, that's it for this time around. Next time, we are going to listen to chapter 14, and then we're going to revisit some thoughts from one of our favorite guests, and I would also venture one of our favorite people, Mike Super.
Oh, yeah, he's way up there on my list. I adore him, especially in a corporate setting. And
Yeah.
I think that's what we're talking about.
We pulled that section from his original interview. He certainly knows how to be a great corporate magician, and that's what we'll talk about next time. And then we'll also listen to chapter 14. But until then, check out the YouTube channel for all those magician interviews or anything else having to do with Eli Marks. You can find a link in the show notes. We'd love to have you subscribe. That will really help us out.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to see you next time, or hear you next time, or be with you next time with chapter 14, the linking rings. And as John said, a great snippet from our chat with our friend, magician Mike Super.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care, people. This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Albertsbridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at elimarksmysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.